Perfect. All right. Okay, well, let's get started. I know it's kind of quick and I know you got to do this all day, so I'll try to keep the questions slightly different and to keep us moving along.
Oh, thank
Uh,
you.
all right. So, I am here with the director of Shook, a new movie that's going to be debuting at TIFF. I am super excited for this interview. So, please just tell me a little bit about yourself and your kind of filmmaking career and how you kind of created and started working with this film.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Amar Wala, and I'm a Toronto-based filmmaker. Been at this a while, mostly actually in the documentary space, and Shook is my first scripted feature, which has been a long time coming and something that to be honest, thought I would finish much earlier in my career. But now that it's here, I'm just grateful that I got a chance to do it because I know, it's a milestone that often many filmmakers don't get a chance to reach. So I just feel really, really grateful.
How did you find that transition from documentary to feature film?
I mean, it was really seamless for me. I mean, my student films were always fiction films, like scripted films. And so as I kind of entered the industry, particularly up here in Canada, the industry's already kind of small. And I had graduated film school back in 2008, which was right as the recession hit, right? And so there really wasn't an easy pathway to getting a first feature made when you're, just a kid in their 20s. And so I had a friend who had a camera and we had access to this really amazing story for a documentary. And so we decided to just dive in and make that. And so that film, which was called The Secret Trial 5, was my first feature documentary, and it premiered at Hot Docs 10 years ago, actually. And that kind of began my career as a doc filmmaker. So I started, working in episodic documentaries and doing other shorts and things like that, and really kind of figuring out how to earn a living as a filmmaker, right? Because that's something they never tell you is how do you actually earn money and make your work? But I always knew I wanted to return to scripted work. And so, I just kind of wrote Shook with my writing partner in the non-con kind of on spec. And then when we were ready, when we felt like it was good enough, I approached my co-producing partner, Karen Harnish, who runs an amazing company up here called Film Forge. Their last film was Infinity Pool with Alexander Skarsgård
Yeah.
and directed by Brendan Cronenberg. And so she's a very, very highly regarded producer here and just a wonderful person. And so when she said, yeah, she wanted to come on board and do this with me, I knew we had a shot at getting it done.
Yeah, that's great. How are you drawn to this material? I know I'm clearly, I would assume there's some of you in here in this
Yeah.
story. So,
Yeah, well, I mean, so the film is kind of like loosely based on my mid and late 20s, which is, really a time that was kind of defining for me as an adult. So my parents had kind of split up, and I was living with my mother in sort of the outer suburbs of Toronto in a place called Scarborough where I grew up. And my dad, who was no longer living with us, was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease at that time. And so it was a very difficult time because that family unit was no longer together. And my dad had just been diagnosed with this illness. And so, at that point, I was in that weird haze of your 20s where you finish school, but you're trying to be an artist, but there's no clear pathway on what to do next, right? There's no clear roadmap of, all right, well, if you want to make movies, here's step one and step two. So I had no idea what my future looked like, and throw in these kind of family issues. When I sat down to write, which was many years later, this is kind of just the story that came pouring out of me. And I think it was just connecting more so with that time. It wasn't so much about my dad's diagnosis of the illness or, the situation with my parents. It was just about learning to be an adult for real, right? And so it felt like something that a lot of people go through and a lot of people can relate to. It also felt like a really timely thing because the city of Toronto, like many other places, has become increasingly harder to live in for young people. And so doing what I was able to do 15 years ago now is even harder because rent is so much higher. The spaces and access for artists is so much lower. So it just felt like a timely moment for the script. And yeah, so there is a lot of us in there, but I wouldn't call it a based on a true story film. It's sort of just rooted in a little bit of my personal history. And what gave me the confidence to really do it was a film called The Farewell by Lulu Wang that, obviously played Sundance and became a huge hit after. But that was such a specific film to that filmmaker that was rooted in sort of this cultural specificity, but felt universal. because it was so specific, right? So that really gave me the confidence to do this and to think, hey, you know what, maybe we can fund this thing.
Yeah, I really like that. And I do like that, even if, because I obviously I'm not based in Toronto, I'm based in Southern California, which has a lot of similar things where it's impossible to live here, but I still do anyway. But one of the things I was really drawn to was how much those experiences do feel universal. It really, Shook really does kind of take you into that time where, yeah, you're in your mid to late 20s, you're thinking that you've got it all figured out, but you're also really immature and you handle emotional things really poorly, even though you think that you've got it all down. And I think the film really expresses that. So one of the things, and I want you to kind of elaborate a little bit on it, one of the things I really liked was some of that othering, but not so much in the terms that we kind of think of it, right? Where this is city versus suburbs, not so much like overtly racist versus immigrant. Well, some of that is slightly there. It's a little bit more subtextual. So talk to me a little bit about how you kind of implemented that into the script, because it's really effective and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it felt Adnan Khan, my co-writer, and I, we actually grew up together, and then kind of went our different ways as young adults. And then he became like this like award-winning young novelist here in Toronto. And so when I wanted to write the script, I kind of knew I wanted a co-writer or at least someone to bounce ideas off of, because it was such a personal story. I didn't want it to just stick to just what happened with my family, right? I wanted to expand it and kind of create a bit of distance for myself. And so working with someone else was kind of the goal. And he became the perfect partner because he's also a South Asian guy who grew up in the city, but he also specifically knew my family growing up, which is very rare and weird. But we kind of had very similar experiences in different fields. He's a writer, you know, he's a novelist. His second book is coming out next year. And I was obviously taking the path of trying to be a filmmaker. And but when we came together, we realized our experiences navigating those industries and navigating the city were very, very similar. And so it's probably something a lot of people from the outsides of places go through, right? Like you may live in LA, but that doesn't mean you feel connected to Hollywood or to the industry at all, right? It might as well be a different city, right? Yeah. So Toronto being sort of the economic and cultural hub of Canada, we grew up in the suburbs in a place called Scarborough, but it might as well be a million miles away, right? Like that doesn't mean that you get access to sort of like the institutional and artistic power structures of downtown Toronto. So that, you know, the barriers you face, they never come directly at you. They're almost invisible at first, and you kind of have to learn to navigate them, not just as an artist, I think as any young person who's trying to figure out their life in a big city. But I think we were also partly reacting to a lot of the films that come out that touch on these issues do so in a very kind of head-on direct way, particularly after, you know, like the last few years. And I'm not knocking those films. I think that artists take different approaches to things, but it just felt like I, as an audience member, as a first and foremost a film lover, wanted to see something that felt like, not that it avoided those things because they're built into the way we live, right? But that took a more realistic approach to it that felt more like those things are a side issue that characters have to deal with, but it doesn't define their lives, right? And so it was very important to me to kind of like root the film in ideas of family, of adulthood, of romance, while those other things are kind of like adding texture and specificity to Ashish's life, who's our lead character.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that's one of the things that makes the film so effective is it's not just about Ashish and his dad getting Parkinson's, or Ashish finding, trying to develop an interrelational relationship, dealing with divorce, like all of those things surround him. And I think that's something that makes this film really special in a sense that our lives are like that. Our lives are complicated. We don't deal with one issue specifically at any given time. It's everything that surrounds us. So I really like that about the film a lot.
No, I really appreciate what you said earlier too, where you said that, yeah, you know, when you're in your 20s, but you deal with emotional things really poorly, like that is kind of partly what Ash is going through, right? Like what I realized looking back in my life then was that, you know, the things that my family went through, they kind of suck, but they're not things other people haven't been through before. It's not stuff that other people don't deal with. But when it happens to you, it feels like the end of the world, right? And so hopefully by the end of the film, people start to feel like maybe Ash is maturing a little bit or starting to kind of like figure this stuff out. But it is true, you know, like you're supposed to have your shit figured out, forgive me for swearing, by
No,
the time
please.
you're a certain age. But the thing is, none of us do, right? Like when I look back at the way I was in my 20s, like I'm not disappointed in myself or mad at myself, but for the way I reacted to those things. But I would react much differently now as I'm a much more, you know, I guess you could say like adult person.
Yeah. Yeah. And you definitely have that when you look back 10, 15, 20 years later and you're like, oh, I'm still here. Like I lived through it. I survived. We're okay. We made it through. Well, thank you so much. I have two last questions for you. And then you know we'll wrap up. So one last question. What do you hope people are really going to gain from this film as it premieres at TIFF?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like an like weird thing to say, but like I think, especially here in Toronto, but I think all over sort of Western cinema, the way we've been talking about, we've had a lot of sort of like films from people of color that deal with issues of trauma and racism and things like that, or diaspora in sort of a head-on way. And I think that that's very valuable to a certain extent, but I think that the audience is looking for more and ready for sort of like the simpler, more down-to-earth stories. So what I'm hoping is that when people walk out of Shook, they feel the way that, you know, we used to feel when we watched a great movie back in the day. You know what I mean? That even though it touches on difficult subject matter, you walk out of the theater and you're energized, you feel so good because you know you just watched something really good. I don't know that the film is good enough to do that. I hope it is, but that's kind of the feeling I want for people, is to just walk out of there feeling like, you know, there's no lesson to be learned or any of that stuff. They just watched a really great movie and they can't wait to tell their friends about it, or they can't wait to watch it again. I miss that feeling as a moviegoer, and I hope that, you know, we can give at least a few people that feeling when they watch the film.
Yeah. Well, and I'll gas you up a little bit because I definitely had some of that feeling. I very much enjoyed this movie a lot, and I really hope people give it a chance. I know discoveries tend to be a hard section to get to when you've got such a massive slate, but I would encourage anybody that has time in their schedule to definitely check out Shook. I genuinely enjoyed the movie a lot. So yeah, thank you. And I hope it does great things. Last question for you, totally off the film itself. But what has been your favorite movie that you've watched this year?
This year?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a tough one. I have to rack my brain as to what I've watched so far. You know what? My wife and I just watched Richard Linklater's Hitman a couple of days ago, and it was so much fun.
Yeah.
It was so much fun. So that, I mean, if I rack my brain, there may be others that are competing, but right now that's the one that's coming to mind.
Mhm.
And it's on Netflix, so I hope everyone's seeing it because it's really, really good.
Yeah, that's a great pick. That's one of my favorite movies of the year, and I saw it at TIFF last year. So yeah, still one of my favorites. So great pick.
See, I didn't get a chance to see it at TIFF, so I'm glad I finally did, and it lived up to it. So
yeah, no, that's great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. I will encourage everybody to check out Shook, as you should. So thank you so much, and have a great day, man. Thank you.
Derek, I appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, Derek.